Respected Mr. Sumit Binani, Speaker of the Day, Dr. J.N. Mukhopadhyay, Director, Heritage Business School, Dr. Madhuba Bokshe, Dean Media Science, faculty colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, and dear students. A very good afternoon to you all. Myself, Dr. Bobby Basu, Faculty Heritage Business School, take this privilege to welcome you all to this webinar organized by Heritage Business School. Heritage Business School started its journey in the year 2003 and Advanced Management Program. It is affiliated to Maulana Abul Kalam Azad University of Technology and is approved by All India Council of Technical Education. Under the visionary leadership of a top management, Heritage Business School has achieved many accolades. To name a few in the recent past, Heritage Business School has been awarded as the best education brand in 2020 by ETH, an initiative by Economic Times. Heritage Business School has also been declared as the most preferred B school in the East in the year 2020 at the 13th ASSOCHAM Higher Education Forum. Now, at HBS Kolkata, apart from academics, we organize industry institute interface sessions where we invite experts from corporate houses and academia to share their vast experience with our students so as to enhance their practical knowledge. Today, we are very happy to have amongst us Mr. Sumit Binani. He is the director at ValueWise Consultancy Private Limited. He is a CS as well as an MBA. And a very warm welcome to you, Mr. Binani.
Thank you.
Mr. Binani will be speaking on insolvency and bankruptcy code. One of the biggest challenges faced by Indian banking sector over the last few years has been the issue regarding the NPAs. Bank give loans and advances to its borrowers, and NPAs are the bad loans and advances where the borrowers stop making interest or the principal repayment for more than 90 days. Now, as per the report of World Bank, non-performing asset accounted for 2.6% of the total loans which was being issued by the Indian banking sector in the year 2011, and this figure rose to 9.1% in the year 2016. That means over a span of 5 years, the NPAs have more than tripled. Now, with an increasing proportion of banks' assets that have ceased to generate income for the bank's profitability has decreased, which in turn decreased the ability of the bank to grant further credit. Now, to control the menace of the NPAs, the Government of India and Reserve Bank of India has taken a host of reforms, and one of the biggest reforms which has been implemented by Government of India is in December 2016, the Insolvency and the Bankruptcy Code. I'm sure most of us are conversing with these terms, insolvency and bankruptcy. Just for a recapitulation, insolvency is the inability to pay the debt when it is due. That means it is the state of being unable to pay the money owed by a person or a company to its creditors, whether it is financial or operation, on time, right? And those who are in a state of insolvency are called insolvents, whereas bankruptcy is a legal procedure through which insolvents who cannot pay credits to their creditors, they seek relief for some or all of their debts. I'm sure today's session is going to be a very enriching session, and we can hear from Mr. Binani what are the measures or what are the reforms that should be there in the bankruptcy code, what are the issues that should be addressed in the bankruptcy code. And without further ado, I would now request Director Sir, Dr. J.N. Mukhopadhyay, to introduce our speaker of the day, Mr. Binani, in a formal way and take forward the session. Over to you, sir.
Good afternoon to everyone. On behalf of Heritage Group, the Heritage Business School, all the faculties of Heritage Business School and all the students, I would like to have a very warm welcome to our keynote speaker of the day, Mr. Sumit Binani. But before that, I'm now seeing in the screen Dr. Gaur Banerjee, the principal Academy, Heritage Academy, and Mr. he was a banker for a very long time as a chief manager in a public sector bank. So before I go to the formal introduction, Dr. Gorbhanji, you have to tell us what motivates you to join us now at 2:30 when our students are not joining in time. Dr. Gorbhanji, one line of motivation for all of us.
Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon, sir, Mr. Sumit Birani.
Good afternoon, sir.
And other members of faculty, including I can see our Dean Madam is also there, and our very popular director sir is there. So the thing is that the topic itself is so attractive in present day scenario because the bankruptcy or default arises out of non-payment. It may be on account of willful default or unwilling due to situation, business situation. So these two types of category, that is, one is willful default and another is unwillful or any for genuine business reason. In any case, ultimately ends at bankruptcy in legal parlance, and therefore it is quite natural under the present economic scenario of a pandemic, almost shutdown of the industries, almost shutdown of all the small sectors, and very little purchasing power on the part of the people in general. It is obvious that bankruptcy is an eventuality and cannot be ruled out. Now, the thing is that if we are quite aware of the norms and guidelines, so far as it is, we may have better chance of sailing through it in a more comfortable way than others. So, under this situation, I feel this is a very, very relevant topic to discuss and relevant topic to listen as well. And therefore, I am thankful on behalf of the Heritage Group of Institution to say we are thankful, sir, Mr. Sumit Birani. You just came at the point when you were demanded.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. All the best.
A formal introduction of Mr. Sumit Birani. I'm very thankful. He is a fellow of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India. He passed the finals with all-India rank of 48th. He is a fellow of the Institute of Company Secretaries of India. He is also a cost accountant, and he did MBA also from IIM Calcutta. And the other thing is, we talk of as teachers, we talk of continuous learning. As you can see, he has never stopped learning, and he also became a registered insolvency professional. A new kind of thing came up, and you will all be happy to know that he was the first in India to crack this limited insolvency examination. He is a regular speaker in corporate laws at the Chambers of Commerce and Professional Institutes. And he is now, after working at HDFC Securities, at SREI and ICICI Bank, he is now doing his own consultancy, which is very dear to me because, I always very fond of people who can start on their own. I always wanted to, but never had the courage. So I am always very happy to meet people who can start on their own. And under him, we are very happy that he has successfully resolved 5 cases as a resolution professional. Monnet Ispat and Energy, Adhunik group of companies with debt size ranging from INR 850 crores to INR 11,000 crores. He is also acted as a liquidator of the Gujarat NRE Coke Limited, and he has trained over 500 professionals for limited insolvency examination. Right? So basically, Dr. Bobby gave a very good introduction on the topic. So this Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code was passed in 2016 by the Parliament finally after a lot of problems. Now, this non-performing asset is a very, very big problem. Whereas people like us, to get a 5 lakh rupees loan also is becoming difficult for us. To start a business, 1 crore loan is difficult. But there are people, some companies are defaulting 1,000 crores. And the joke is they come in a scooter to take the first loan. Then they say they cannot pay, they come in a Maruti 800. And later on, they come to BMW and tell that the company has become bankrupt. So to end to this problem, the government has taken this stand, and the insolvency resolution has to be done in 180 days. That is the spirit of the law with an upper time limit. And for that, there's the insolvency regulators being appointed, and there are insolvency professionals. So one of the things I will request Mr. Sumit Birani is also to inspire our students, if they can also become, how they can become an insolvency professional. And the best part is, that the board of the directors of the company will stand superseded or suspended during that time, and the promoters will not have any say in the management of the company when it will go to the National Company Law Tribunal, right? So it's a very, very nice thing which is happening. So promoters will be really afraid now if they default, their own company which they have nurtured for so many years might be taken away from them. So a lot of amendments had to be done to get into this act basically. And I'm happy to report that the Essar Steel was properly resolved through this. It was very famous group, Essar Steel, but it cleared the way for ArcelorMittal India, Nippon Steel Japan to form a joint venture to complete the takeover in December 2019. So Essar Steel was a big success story. Bhushan Steel, as you know, was taken over by Tata Steel. So that was another company defaulting and the success resolved. Electro Steel, which was again a 10,000 crores kind of investment, but since it never took off properly, so it was again allowed to be acquired by Vedanta Limited, right? So there are lots of success stories like Amtech Auto, Bhushan Power and Steel. But of course, the committee sometimes are finding fraud in financial dealings of the company or the previous promoter, so that's the problem. And as we know, Jet Airways has not yet been resolved. And I think Reliance Communication is being partially resolved. So I think the best part is the promoters cannot go on becoming rich at the cost of the people, the banks basically. So with that spirit, it has been done. So I think Mr. Sumit Binani is the expert. So now may I invite formally Mr. Sumit Binani to give us a detailed aspect of this. Over to you, sir.
Yeah, thank you very much, sir. Dr. Bobby Basu, Mr. Banerjee, Mr. Bakshi, all the senior professors, and of course my own teacher, Mr. J.N. Mukhopadhyay, sir. So a very good afternoon to all of you and all the students and participants who are there. See, I mean, this is a topic, and when you look at the topic Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, perhaps you may feel, oh, it is all about law and it would be very much mundane and probably you'll all get bored. But no, friends, I will make it very, very interesting to you. And let me share with you that in 2016, when this code was promulgated in India, I think this is one of the few best things which has happened in our country over the past 3-4 years. If I were to look at from a perspective of a professional, a commerce professional, I would say the two biggest reforms has hit our country. And I'm not giving any credit to any particular government because, the thought process begins much earlier. And then when it finally sees the light, it's already 20 to 40 years wherein people might have been working on these possible legislations. So the two things which has happened in our country after 2016 is one is the IBC, the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, and the other one is the GST reforms. And that has changed the way businesses are happening in our country. Let me tell you that this law, when it was basically announced, people thought that probably, they are probably dreaming because it brought itself a financial tsunami in the entire financial and business segment the day it was announced. And for the initial 3-4 months, people were grappling to basically come to terms that whether such sort of law can be passed in India or whether the government of a country a country like ours has got the wherewithal to launch such a law, in spite of the fact that GST was much in a debate. But then let me proceed with the topic because I have got very less time and the law is huge. So friends, prior to passing of the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, if any company or any individual were to borrow money, right? So they could borrow money from where? From banks, from financial institutions, from private parties, from companies, from non-banking financial companies, right? And even the individual used to give loan to various known people at a consideration which we all know is an interest. Now, what happened if there was a default. Let us assume that we as an individual gave loan to another entity, and that entity was a company, or that entity was an individual. And if there was a default by that entity, what was the recourse available to us? You'll be surprised to note that prior to 2016, the only recourse available to us was in two different laws, the Presidency Town Insolvency Act and the Provincial Insolvency Act, which was a 100-year-old legislation. And if there was a default, the only recourse available was you to file a suitable petition or application under these two laws before the city civil court or before the high court. And I'm sure that you are all aware, and even if you're not aware, you can all ask your parents. The teachers and faculties would be aware that once a case was filed, it took around 15, 20, 25 years, 30 years to get resolved. So the recourse mechanism which was available was a sort of nightmarish. I mean, once there was a default, I mean, you could have lost the hope of recovering your money, or either wait for 15, 20 years, 25 years, burn your money on the lawyers, and then finally when you ended up getting, the money's time value would have been lost totally. Now, as far as the banks and financial institutions were concerned, when they used to provide loan, they had an additional recourse mechanism under a law called SARFAESI, wherein banks and financial institutions were entitled to file an application before the SARFAESI court and get the asset which was financed against that loan possessed with them and recover their loan. But that also, friends, took a lot of time. Normally, a SARFAESI matter used to take around 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. And you know what banks used to do? Say, for example, if the bank has given a loan to a company and the company has taken a loan against a property. So banks used to apply SARFAESI and used to take possession of the property which was charged against that loan. And of course, that property was in a closed state. I mean, it was not functional. Suppose if it was a running company, if it was a running factory, banks are not entitled to run the factory. They would just possess the assets, deploy a security guard, and the factory will not be running. The possession would come to the bank. So what the next step the banks were required to do was to sell those assets. Now, if it took the banks to sell 10 years, 15 years, just imagine what would have happened to that factory in a closed state. The value of the assets would have depleted like anything. So ultimately, after 10 years, 15 years, if the bank got a buyer, it used to get peanuts for that property, though it was in the possession of the bank. So that was also not working well as far as defaults were concerned in our country. Let us come back to us. We as individual, when we have savings, we would like to definitely earn a maximum return out of our savings. So if J.N. Mukhopadhyay sir is the person who would not like to take risk and would like to have a safe bet, he would only invest in government securities. So what money he will make on investing on government securities? Maybe 5.5%, 6% today, if he were to invest his money per annum. Suppose Dr. Basu wanted to invest her savings and she was willing to take a little higher risk. She would invest it in the fixed deposits of the bank. And let me tell you, we are all aware that even fixed deposits with banks are not fully secure. You must all be aware that after the Yes Bank fiasco, the total guarantee which was given by the government was only 1 lakh rupees on your fixed deposit. So if you had made a fixed deposit of 10 lakh rupees, your fixed deposit was guaranteed by the government to the tune of 1 lakh rupees. Subsequently, they increased the limit to 3 lakh and 5 lakhs. So even that was not absolutely safe. So of course, when you invest in fixed deposit, you took a certain amount of risk, and Dr. Basu must have made 7.5%, right? Maybe 1 or 2% higher than Dr. Mukhopadhyay because he took less risk. Now, if Mr. Banerjee were to take a little higher risk, he thought that, okay, this particular company, say say for example, I'm just taking a name just to make you understand, say Tata Capital. Tata Capital has issued bonds and I will invest in the bonds of Tata Capital for which a credit rating has been done, right? So it basically depicts that how safe or how risky the paper is. But yes, it is riskier than the bank deposit and of course much more riskier than the government security. So what would be the return which is available on corporate bond? Maybe 10%, 10.5%. So the more risk you were required to take, the more return you were able to make. Now, say for example, if that company, say for example, Tata Capital or any other company, I'm sure Tata will never default, but anyway, say for that company defaulted. So what would happen to Mr. Banerjee's money? What recourse he had? Again, go to that Provincial Town Insolvency Act and Presidency Town Insolvency Act, file a case against that company who has defaulted in giving his money, which he has invested in the bonds or debentures of that company, and wait for another 10 years, 15 years till the case finally gets resolved. So this was the recourse mechanism which was available to individuals. But as far as banks and financial institutions were concerned, whenever they used to give loans, and if that loan was secured by the asset of any company of the borrower, then as I mentioned, they had recourse under the SARFAESI mechanism, wherein they were entitled to take possession of the asset and sell those assets in order to retrieve their default. So this was the broad area, or this was the broad piece of legislation which was available in our country. So our government thought that why would the poor individual who has taken risk and invested in a paper or a government bond or a corporate bond or debenture of a company, there should be some time, there should be a speedy recovery mechanism. Otherwise, the investors like you and me who have savings would only depend upon bank fixed deposit interest or maybe government securities, which would earn a very, very low interest rate. And also, let me tell you, friends, I mean, if you are students of finance, then you must be having a capital market subject wherein you all know that the Indian capital market, which is comprising of the equity and the debt segment, we all know that the equity segment is one of the most developed segment as far as the entire world is concerned. People give examples of the Indian equity market and the transparency and governance. But as far as debt market is concerned, for example, companies issuing debentures, companies issuing bonds, and getting their debentures and bonds listed in the equity in the capital market, that market is very, very shallow. We don't have much participants. You and me do not invest in that market. And let me tell you, if you do a Google search, you'll find that since 2009, friends, the government is trying to develop a debt market which would be as active and as akin to the equity market in India. But it has not met with any success. Why? Because if we were to invest in the debentures or bonds through the debt capital market, again, I told you what was the recourse mechanism in case of a default, the 100-year-old legislation, wherein you used to just आप अपनी चप्पल घिसते रहिए 15 साल 20 साल जब तक आपको लगेगा आपका पैसा मिलेगा नहीं मिलेगा, God will only. Right? So that is why you and me, individuals like us, were wary of investing into capital market, which was a debt market. So the government also wanted to develop this market. And that is why the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code was promulgated. So two broad objectives. The government wanted to reorganize the old and archaic law and provided a uniform opportunity and identical opportunity to all section of people, all section of individual, all section of entities who are lending money in the market, so that the recourse mechanism available to them should be available in a time-bound manner and they should be able to recover their debt in a timely manner. So there should not be any discrepancy or disparity between individuals, banks and financial institutions. And there were old laws in place, so government wanted to reorganize this entire thing and bring it to a new law, which they called Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code. And the second objective, as I told you, that government wanted to develop a very, very active debt market. Why? Because we all know that our country will only grow when the infrastructure increases. The more investments come into infrastructure in our company, there would be complementary which would be generated, and it would basically make all of us richer and better. So investment in infrastructure was the priority of the government, for which the government needs money. So where will that money come from? World over, if you see the statistics, if any country is investing into infrastructure, only 4 to 5% of the total capital which goes into creation of infrastructure is met from the equity market. The balance 95% comes from the debt market. So that is why it was very, very imperative for our government to create a very active and debt market where public at large will participate. The government wanted the individual, apart from the corporates and financial institutions, to also participate. And that is why, to give them the confidence that if there is a default, they will have a very strong recourse mechanism, IBC was brought in. So these are the twin objectives. Now, what did IBC change, or what reform did IBC bring in our country? Friends, while promulgating, the object of the code is very, very clear. The government says that any and every individual is entitled to do business, and it is our constitutional right? So once you engage into business, definitely after exhausting your own capital, you will also need borrowed capital to expand your business, correct? Now, for that you will make borrowing. That is absolutely fine. You deploy that capital, borrowed capital and owned capital in your business. Do your business honestly. I'm repeating, do your business honestly. Try to ensure that there is no situation of adversity. Any default situation should be avoided, right? But if you are doing your business honestly, and after making sincere efforts, if you have not been able to avoid the state of insolvency or the state of default, then there must be a revival or a resolution for which the owner of the business, that is we who have created the business, must step back. Okay, because we are promoters of the business, we have deployed our equity, and since equity is a risky capital, we have taken risk. We have honestly run our business, right? And we have sincerely made all the efforts to ensure that the business continues, but due to some reasons, it failed. The failure may be temporary mismatch in cash flows, okay? The failure could be a competition taking over. The failure could be, one of the reasons could be that your product becoming obsolete, right? So there could be n number of reasons. And of course, I don't want to cite dishonest reasons. There are n number of dishonest reasons too, right? So if that situation you are not able to avoid, there must be a resolution, and for which the promoter or the owner of the company should step back. And then who will come over? The creditor, the people who have lent money to the company, should now come forward. Okay, and with the help of a regulated insolvency professional, which is my profession, okay, with the help of a regulated insolvency professional and the creditors who step in whenever there is a default, the promoters take a back seat. The control comes to the creditor under the guidance of the regulated insolvency professional. They will then manage the company. So what will be the job of the individuals who come in, that is the regulated insolvency professional or the committee of the creditors who have lent money? When they come on board, they will say that, hey promoter, you sit back. Okay, the creditor, the people who have lent money, would then look at other investors, because what did I say? That whenever there is a default, it should be avoided, and I'm repeating it so that it hits your mind. Whenever there is a default, the default should be avoided. If it cannot be avoided, there should be a revival. There should be a resolution. So the lender comes on board and tries to look out for another investor to pump in money to that company so that that company can be revived. Promoter, mind you, takes the back seat. Okay, and while the creditor is in search of another investment, and of course there is a process which has been laid out, right? A regulated insolvency professional is appointed, a person like me, And what is his job? His job is to ensure that the company does not shut down. It is a state of default, but please don't shut the company. Please try to run the company and ensure that when you are there, there is no leakage of funds. So which will give a peace of mind to the lender, okay? That yes, there is a person who is regulated. He's an insolvency professional. He will now come on board, appoint other professionals, appoint other technical professionals who will support him to run the business of the company. And since he is a regulated insolvency professional, we are confident that our money, whatever is lying in the company, will be safely utilized only for the purpose of running the business. The law also says that a period of 180 days, whenever an insolvency company's resolution process starts, a 180-day period, which is further extendable by 90 days, is provided in the law. So this 180 days extendable by 90 days, 270 days is provided. And this is the timeline within which the committee of creditors should identify an investor who will come on board and revive the company. And the role of the resolution professional, as I told you, he's a regulated professional. He will sit on the board, and all the powers of the board of directors and the promoter, as Mr. Mukhopadhyay sir was telling us, will get seized and will get transferred to the resolution professional. So he will be the board. He will step into the shoes of the promoter, of course, as a trustee, and ensure that the business carries on. And creditor will look out for the investor. And the time period given for this process is 180 days, which may be extendable by another period of 90 days. So this 270-day window is given to revive the company. Now, during this process, the law also says that while this process is on, I will create a period which is known as Shantika period, a period of peace. So what it essentially says is that during this period, nobody will be able to file a case against the company for which a resolution process is on, which technically is known as a period of moratorium. So which means that even if Supreme Court has passed an order against the company, that order will not be executable because of the period of moratorium. So आपको शांति का period मिल रहा है, and that is very much required, because if the company is defaulting, there are so many other stakeholders who come in, who file case, who says that मेरा पैसा दे दो. There are creditors who have supplied goods, मेरा पैसा बाकी है. There are bankers who have lent money, and they will start filing cases against the company because the company has defaulted. So if this thing happens, just imagine what will the poor insolvency professional do. His entire time will go into handling these cases. The creditors will not be at peace. Creditors' duty is to find out an investor. So that is why the law has provided them a period of peace, Shanti ka period. कि आपको जब process चल रहा है तो nobody will create any trouble for you by filing any case etc. against the company which is being. This is the principle and this is the main foundation of the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code. But yes, there is another important thing which I wanted to touch. Remember what did I say? In the earlier regime, banks and financial institutions, they had a recourse under SARFAESI law. And when there was a default, what used to happen? They used to go and acquire the asset, keep it with themselves. And the asset was kept closed until it was sold. Here, what does the law say? Law says, don't acquire the assets. You come on board, you take charge, but keep the company running. And I will ensure that a regulated professional is coming and doing all the work which would have done by the promoter as far as running the company, etc. is concerned as trustee. And he's also answerable to the regulator. He's also answerable that he's running the company in a proper way. Why? Why the company is allowed, the company has been mandated to continue to run? Very simple example. Suppose a company had a banquet hall. And we all know in banquet hall, marriages and ceremonies happen, right? And if that company had defaulted. So what happened in the SARFAESI regime? SARFAESI regime, the bank would have possessed the asset, kept it under lock and key. And after 6 months, if you go and open the doors of that banquet hall, what you will find? you'll find that the furnitures have depleted. And it happens. You do it in your house also. If there is an extra room, you keep the room locked for two months or 3 months. And after 3 months, you try to open the room, you'll find that it will be in a depleted position. So this law says that don't keep it under lock and key. Continue running the business. It will be the duty of the insolvency professional who will hire other professional and continue running the banquet hall. Because if it runs, A, it will yield a revenue, and 2, its value will not get depleted. So this is a clear departure from the earlier regime. And that is why the resolution professional is required to run the business of the company till the company is revived. And of course, after revival, the new investor comes in and takes charge and revives the company. Other important aspect behind this thought is that, see, it is very easy to kill a company, right? That a company has defaulted, usme tala laga. But once you make that tala in that company, you are not only shutting the company, but just imagine the workmen, the employee, the wage earners who are associated with the company, they all lose their jobs and life. Think about so many vendors, suppliers who supply goods to the company. They all lose that business opportunity. They also make losses. So all these people also have families. So the direct and indirect loss to so many people is just not acceptable. And hence, the law says that whenever there is a default, there should be a revival. Please don't kill the company. Right? And that brings me to a very important point, and hear this out clearly, that what is the thought process of the government behind this law. So now that you have got a sense that yes, you have done a business, you have done it honestly, and there is a situation which you cannot avoid, company has defaulted. So, but yeah, company can also be viable. I mean, today the default which has happened may be due to temporary mismatch in cash flow. Or there may be a situation wherein one of your largest debtors, say for example, you are only dependent upon 3 debtors. 3 debtors means three people to whom you have supplied goods from the company, right? And one of the suppliers, one of the people to whom you have supplied goods accounts for 70 to 80% of your total receivables. And there is some problem which is being faced by that individual. So suddenly you'll find that because of no fault of yours, your 70 to 80% of the revenue has dried up. And that person says that, no, I am not defaulting, but I am not in a position to pay due to some situation. So I will defer the payment by 4 months, 5 months. But your business situation is that you're not able to wait for 4 or 5 months. And hence there is a temporary situation which is leading to default. So you can face the default at that point of time. And hence your company can be taken into insolvency and bankruptcy court for a revival. So there could be n number of situations. So, but the example which I gave you, your company has failed due to a particular event which was not under your control. Okay, and I'm talking about honest businessmen. But your business is still viable. Your business is still viable. So the law says that the default may happen, but if a company has defaulted but it's still viable, attempt should be made to rescue that company. Why rescue that company? I already told you there are so many people who are attached to this company, whose livelihood is attached to the company. And hence the rescue attempt should be made. But if the company has defaulted but also not viable, still make a last attempt of rescuing that company. And hence a resolution is necessary, for which a window of 270 days is given. Regulated insolvency professional comes in, promoter takes the back seat, the lenders who have lent money comes on front. There is a period of peace, and 270 days is given, and the company has to continue to run the business. So just imagine,
if the person has tried to honestly run the business, then what is the additional thing a new person could come and revive it? Because if it was not a fraud case, what is the new thing that a new person can bring in the table? What's by your experience?
so I told you that the honest person may have run the business, and the default could be out of a temporary mismatch in cash flow situation, or his products have become obsolete, or a competition has taken over for which he requires additional funds and he's not having. So he's not able to compete in the market. So the other investor would come in, utilize his existing facilities, add his working capital, and try to innovate and carry forward the business, which the existing businessman may not be having at that point of time. Right? So that could be one classic situation.
From your practical knowledge, why do you think Bhushan Steel and Electro Steel, what was the main problem with those two companies? The Bhushan Steel, for example, these two companies.
So see, Bhushan Steel and majority of the companies which have gone into insolvency and bankruptcy code is probably, the banks have waited too long. Banks have waited too long for basically trying to revive them. And of course, the IBC regimen was not available because, see, the law also says that an insolvency can be triggered at the slightest amount of default. See, earlier the default size was only 1 lakh rupees, but today it is 1 crore after the COVID situation. Recently, there has been an amendment. So I'm glad that you brought this question. And again, I will just slightly digress and also provide you a very important point. That why the slightest amount of default of 1 lakh rupees? See, we all know that, and you can also ask your parents, all the students who are there, if your parents are doing business, and they will also vouch for it, that whenever a company takes a loan, right? So today, Indian banking system, how do they work? Mr. Banerjee would also know, he has been a banker. I mean, after every 3 months, they ask for a CMA report, and they want that, okay, their money, EMI is paid, the interest is paid, and they are happy. Do the bankers bother to basically find out and go an extra step as to what is happening in that business? I'm not blaming the bankers. I'm also trying to say that there is always an asymmetry of information. The information flow between the borrower and the lender is not up to the desired level. A, the promoter doesn't want to give the information beyond what is required under law. And B, the bankers are happy because they have a standard operating procedure that, okay, if this information is available, if I am getting my quarterly payments on right time, everything is hunky-dory in the company, right? So, but then, the element which a promoter is aware, he is into the business. He can see that after 6 months, he will not be able to serve the loan, which the banker is not aware. So this asymmetry of information has to be also plugged in. So that is why the law says that it can be triggered for resolution at the slightest amount of default, which initially was 1 lakh, now it is 1 crore. So this will give an immediate signal कि 1 लाख रुपए का default है, मतलब कहीं ना कहीं कुछ problem है. The banker should start sitting higher up on the table and start taking to notice things more seriously. And see why I'm, and very interesting angle. See, as Mr. Mukhopadhyay said that what happened to Bhushan Steel, why they defaulted. So Bhushan Steel, when they defaulted, the bank said, okay, आप default कर रहे हैं, चलिए ठीक है, हम आपको और लोन दे देते हैं. वो लोन को आप और वर्किंग कैपिटल लीजिए, फिर आप बिजनेस को चलाइए, हमको फिर पैसा दे दीजिए, राइट? और उस समय there was no such thing as IBC, right? So the default which initially occurred was of 1 lakh rupees, went up to 10 lakhs, went up to 1 crores. 15,000 crores banks have given. A default of 1 crore, 2 crore, 5 crores, bankers said it was not noticeable. Right? Okay, the company would make it at some point of time. Let us allow it to, let us allow some more breadth to the company. So they kept on, serving the company. They kept on granting additional facilities. And one fine day, out of nowhere, this debt, which was 1 lakh, 1 crore, 10 crores, ballooned to around 2,000 crores. Suddenly it happened. So, and of course, there have been element of preferential transaction, fraudulent transaction in all such companies. Whether it has been finally adjudicated or not, I'm not too sure. But yes, there have been cases which have been filed because there were so many dishonest transactions which took place. But anyway, let's keep that out. So, with this law coming in, slightest amount of default will trigger some sense in the banker that no, there's something wrong and I should move forward. And there's another element. See, I'm giving you very interesting thought process of the government. If there is a slightest amount of default, say default, bank has given 400 crores loan to a company and the default is 1 crore. If the banker acts at that point of time and proceeds for insolvency proceedings and tries to revive the company, because 1 crore company can be taken into insolvency, the banker is in a position to get an investor who would be able to commit high value because the assets have not deteriorated and the bankers have acted on the slightest amount of default. But if you allow the debt to balloon to 50 crores or 100 crores, it would mean that when the default was 1 crore and the time it became 50 to 100 crores default, with the flux of time, the asset quality has also deteriorated. And when at that point of time, if you try to take the company for revival under insolvency and bankruptcy code, the investor who would be willing to put in money would give you lesser money. Isn't it? I hope that you are all able to understand. I'm trying to make it a story rather than taking you to the provisions of the law, but I hope that all of you are able to understand. I may like to have one or two. Yeah.
I have one question.
Yes, sir.
But I have recently, over the last 1 year or so, I have seen the failure of DHFL, Dewan Housing Finance Limited, which was declared bankrupt, insolvent under the Act.
Right.
Okay. Now it has been official liquidator has been appointed. Everything is under as per law is carrying on. Now, can you please highlight on the case? You can cite the example of the case, how it has been taken care of very nicely with the help of the present day code.
So, Dr. Banerjee, we can. I think. Let me first take you through the code. I mean, I think this is a very specific case. Okay.
Okay.
So if you allow me, I will take you through the code. But before I proceed, one or two students, can they just tell me that what they want? I mean, are they enjoying? Because then I will, change my, presentation. I hope they are all enjoying and able to understand. From the students, any of you, please. So that is why it is very important to understand the principles behind the formulation of the code and the thought process of the government, as I was just mentioning. Now, this, whatever I have told you, gives you a basic overview of the principle and the foundation and the pillars of the code. Now, and another important aspect which I want to give you is that the law very clearly says that please rescue, please revive whenever there is a default and make the best of the attempt to revive the company. Time period is 270 days. What happens if there is no revival after the expiry of 270 days? When I say no revival, the creditors have tried to look out for investor and no investor came forward. Or there was an investor who came forward, but the value which he offered for taking over the company and repaying the debts was not acceptable to the creditors. Right. So in such situation, after the expiry of 270 days, the law says that the law has given enough opportunity to the creditors to look for an investor. But yes, we have to move forward, and hence the resolution process has failed. So the next step is liquidation. You won't imagine, India is perhaps the only country in the world wherein our Supreme Court has come forward and said that even when the company goes into liquidation, the objective of the Insolvency Bankruptcy Code is not to kill a company, not to kill a business. The objective or the preamble, the very foundation of the code is revive, resolve. Nowhere it is mentioned that you can kill the company. But yes, you have exhausted the timeline given in the law. And in the law, it is also mentioned that once the resolution fails, the company goes into liquidation. So even when the company goes into liquidation, hear me out very carefully. An attempt shall be made to revive the company, even under liquidation. And there are ways and means which has been prescribed. So when the company goes into liquidation, the committee of creditors, the creditors who are in control, they also now take the back seat. Okay. First process, promoter took the back seat, creditor came in control, regulated insolvency professional who was known as the resolution professional was in charge. No revival, company goes into liquidation. Promoter is as it is out. The creditor who were in control is also out. The person who was acting as the regulated insolvency professional now steps into the shoes of the liquidator. And the law gives him full authority to sell the assets of the company and out of the proceeds of the company, distribute the money to the creditors as prescribed in the code. Okay. So this is the overall picture which the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code gives you. Now, one or two important aspects. If the company would have been revived under the resolution process, an investor would have come forward, pumped in money in the company and would have paid the creditors and continued with the company. But when the company goes into liquidation, what is the job of a liquidator? As I told you, Supreme Court said, even if the company goes into liquidation, first make an attempt to still revive even under the liquidation process. So you will ask me then what is the difference? There was a resolution process which already gave you 270 days. Again, in liquidation, you are trying for revival. So the only difference which I can see over here is that in the previous regime, that is the resolution process of 270 days, who approved the investor or the plan of the investor or the revival package of the investor? The creditors. In the liquidation, the law gives power to the liquidator to look for an investor to revive the company. And there is a limited window of 3 months provided. If that doesn't happen, the liquidator will go ahead and start auctioning the assets of the company. Okay, start auctioning the assets of the company and then sell the assets. And whatever money is received after selling the assets of the company will be distributed to the creditors. Okay. Now, how it will be distributed? Very, very important. And I'm just sharing with you because you just have to understand the thought process of the government and what government has done. Say, for example, 100 crores of assets was sold and 100 crores was recovered by the liquidator after selling the assets. Now he has to distribute the money. He has to distribute it in a waterfall mechanism, which is prescribed in the code. And what is the waterfall? First, the money will be utilized to take care of all the costs which have been incurred to run the resolution process and the liquidation process. And that's fine. So the fees of the resolution professional and the liquidator is safe in law, right? Next, first pay the secured creditors, secured financial creditors, people who have given loan against whom the assets of the company is mortgaged will be paid first. After paying off those creditors in full, if there is any money left, then money will be paid to the employee of the company. And that too, their dues up to 2 years prior to the starting of the process. After paying the employee, if any money is left, next the money will be paid to the unsecured financial creditor. Means people who have lent money to the company, but their money is not secured or not charged against the assets of the company. If after paying the unsecured creditor, if any money is left, friends, then the money will go for payment of statutory dues. So the government's payment, let me tell you, the government's payment is fourth on the position. In the earlier regime, if you see, the government's payment in case of a default is having a top priority. So government altered its position in law because the government wants that first the people who have lent money to the company should be paid. And that is how the waterfall mechanism has been prescribed. I'm not going into the nitty-gritties and details, but I just wanted to give you a perception. Now, as I told you, friends, that this is a law which only talks about revival, resolution. Of course, if there is dishonesty, the insolvency professional is entitled under law to find out the default and report it to the government for appropriate action. All of you who are commerce students or finance students, you all have the opportunity to go for a graduate insolvency program, which is being currently run by the Insolvency Bankruptcy Board of India, which is a 1.5-year course, and it happens at Delhi. It is a residential course, and you can get trained as an insolvency professional. Otherwise, people like us who have become insolvency professional, who are chartered accountants, cost accountants, MBAs, or maybe company secretaries or advocates, they have to have a minimum of 10 years of experience. Then only we can become insolvency professional. So when I applied for becoming the insolvency professional, I had a minimum of 10 years of experience, without which I was not entitled to become an insolvency professional. So all of you who will become MBA would have to be in a management position of 15 years in order to become an insolvency professional. But if you want to fast track the process, you have to appear. You have to appear for the course which is known as Graduate Insolvency Program. You do a Google search, you'll get the details. It's a fantastic program. One batch is already qualified. All of them have been fantastically placed, and the second batch is run. So this is the information which I wanted to give you. Now, what is the role of an insolvency professional? Insolvency professional acts as the CEO. Everything, like whatever the promoter or director was doing, he is expected to do. He has to step into the shoes of an entrepreneur. So when Dr. Mukhopadhyay read my profile, he said that I have resolved Monnet Ispat Limited, which was a 11,000 crore company. The debt size was 11,000 crore. It was a huge steel company, which turnover running into hundreds and hundreds of crores before the default was there. So was it possible for a professional like me, who was a chartered accountant or an MBA, to step into the shoes of the promoter and start running the business? No, I would say no, and let me admit it very candidly. So how did I do it? Well, the law empowers me to hire professionals of technical background to assist me to run the process. So I step into the shoes of the promoter. I have to assume all the responsibility, create positions by hiring technical experts, and depend upon them and run the company. So it gives me an entrepreneurship opportunity so that I become an entrepreneur, and that in 270 days, with the help of lenders, with their support, hiring technical people, and with my acumen and knowledge, I can drive the process, become an entrepreneur, and try to revive a company, which of course will give me a satisfaction that if I have done something good for the society. Right? So that is why it is said that it is a profession of profession, because your job is like a lifeguard. Your job is to basically rescue a failing but viable company, right? And you have to identify the investor, and when you do that, you really feel a lot of peace. And because when you step into the shoes of a lifeguard, you don't think that who is drowning. I mean, even if your enemy is drowning, your job is to save it, Right. So that gives you an immense satisfaction, and that is why this profession, as the regulator of the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Board of India, very clearly states that it is a profession of profession, because here it is all about rescuing an entity, and that is why beyond any commercial consideration, there is a social element also as far as this profession is concerned, and that is why it makes it so different from the other professions. So a lot of challenges. I'm not saying that it is an easy profession to be in, but yes, if you do it honestly, there will be a lot of tremendous satisfaction. But of course, a lot of pressure would also be there, because entrepreneurs just don't do the business so easily. They have to take a lot of pressure. So equal pressure would be there on professionals who engage into such kind of. Another very important point which I want to touch upon, and then I will take questions and answers. Though this is not a recovery law, I mean, it is all about revival of a company which is dying. But there are thousands and thousands of cases wherein people have been able to recover money. And I'll give you one or two examples. And friends, you will be delighted to know. You can go to your home and discuss with your parents who are into business, or discuss with your relatives who are into business. And whoever is not aware of it, they will thoroughly enjoy it. So the law says that if there is a default of more than 1 crore rupees, a company can be taken into insolvency. Today, a company or a limited liability partnership can be taken into insolvency if they have defaulted in payment which is more than 1 crore. Earlier, it was 1 lakh. What kind of default? The default are two types. Either you have taken loan from another company and you have defaulted in repayment of your loan, or you have taken supply of goods and services from a particular professional or a company, and you have not made your payment to that for that services or supply of goods which you have purchased from the market. So the latter default is known as operational default, and the former default, that is taking loan and defaulting, is known as financial default. Right? So for these two defaults, a company can be taken into insolvency. So I'll give you my example. If I am a chartered accountant and I have provided services to a company and my audit fees is, say, more than pending, which is more than the prescribed amount of 1 crore rupees. Okay. And that company is not paying me the money. So what do? I have to send a notice in law under the IBC to the company who has defaulted in my payment of fees, stating that Mr. So-and-so, please pay my audit fees. And I am only giving you 10 days to revert. Within 10 days, either you show me that you've already made the payment to me, okay, or there is an existing dispute due to which you have not made any payment. So I send him a notice. Now you may ask that as soon as he receives my notice, he will say, no, there is an existing dispute. So the law is very, very clear that after sending the notice, somebody cannot raise the dispute. If there is a dispute, you have to immediately respond. So when you provided your services and he did not pay your money, at that point of time, he must have raised a dispute. It is not that you suddenly after 5 months, you are sending a notice and he says, no, your goods were not up to the mark or your services were not up to the mark. So I'm raising a dispute now. So it cannot be an afterthought. Right? So either he has to pay the money or he has to face the consequences. Right? So let us assume that after getting your notice, he pays your money, the story is over. You are happy, he is also happy. If he doesn't pay the money, the law says that you file an application before the tribunal. Now, just like high courts and the small courts, here the adjudicating authority is the National Company Law Tribunal, which is a specially designated tribunal to deal with IBC cases, insolvency cases. So the law says that you file an application after sending a notice before the Company Law Tribunal. And what will that application say? My lord, I have supplied my services to this company. These are the proofs. The company has defaulted in payment of my fees. The default amount is more than 1 crore rupees. I have complied with the law by first sending him a notice of 10 days, wherein I gave him an opportunity to pay my fees, but he did not pay. There is no dispute. And hence, this company should be admitted into insolvency. Friends, you will be surprised to know that the law has been framed in such a manner that once that petition reaches the tribunal, within 14 days, the tribunal has to basically come out with a judgment, and the tribunal will only see these facts. If these facts are there, straight away the company will get admitted into insolvency. Right? Of course, 14 days is not which is practically happening. In our country, it is taking 1.5 months. Slowly and steadily, the system is improving. But I just want to give you a sense that how the law works. Forget the timelines. Timelines are definitely improving. Of late, it has not been very good. But now the government is improving and creating more tribunals so as to improve the timelines. Now, court will not look into any other thing except what I just shared with you. And if it is satisfied that these papers are on record, they will give an opportunity to the company to come and represent its matter, because on ground principles of natural justice, before passing any adverse notice, of opportunity of heard is being given in our country. Once that opportunity is given and the court is satisfied that there is a default, all the parameters are met, the company will get admitted into insolvency. Now, if the company gets into insolvency, friends, what will happen? The promoter of the company who has defaulted will have to take a back seat. His powers will be suspended. Don't you think that it is a huge mental setback for a promoter who has created a company, who treats it like his baby, to let it go under the control of a creditor and a regulated insolvency profession, right? So this is the first setback which he will get when his company gets admitted into insolvency. What is the second setback? As soon as a company gets admitted into insolvency, the law says that there will be a public announcement stating that so-and-so company, promoter so-and-so, has been admitted into insolvency. Huge social setback. If that company is doing good, they will not like their name to get flagged in the society or of a tag of a defaulter, right? And three, he knows this, that within 6 months, that is 180 days or 270 days, there has to be a revival. If the revival does not happen, the company will go into liquidation. So these three fear will force that deliberate defaulter to come to table to negotiate with you before the company gets admitted into insolvency. And that has precisely happened in our country. Out of the 7,000 cases which has been filed before NCLT, 4,000 cases have been resolved prior to the company getting into insolvency, because the promoter felt the fear. Oh, his business would be lost. He would be losing it. Social stigma. So dishonest people who are deliberately stopping the payment of their customers will come forward and try to settle and negotiate with you prior to their company getting admitted into insolvency. And that is why, though it is not a recovery law, it has been working like a recovery law in our company. And a lot of people have recovered their money, which at one point of time was considered to be a bad debt. And that has only been possible because of the timeliness, the effect, the fear factor on the minds of the promoter, which this law has created. And let me tell you, over the past 3 years, it has been working. And the promoters have experienced that it is working for so many of the other promoters, and hence they were forced to come and see. This is something which is really, really beneficial to the overall commerce and industry as far as our country is concerned. And that is why I wanted to highlight this point, so that you can also discuss with your family members who are into business, relatives into the business, and try to give them some sense. And all of them, they are aware, because these days business newspapers, 1/3 of it is full of insolvency news. 1/3 of it is full of insolvency. So I think I just wanted to give you an overview. You know, it's a huge law. It is a code in itself. There are so many regulations, but I think this is enough food for thought. And as Dr. Banerjee was talking about the Dewan Housing Finance Limited, etc. So, of course, steps are being taken, and now there is a talk that non-banking financial companies like Dewan Housing Finance Limited and banks, there would be a separate law which would be brought. for their insolvency, because the current insolvency and bankruptcy code is not a fit law to deal with the default of financial firms. And financial firms includes the non-banking financial companies, the housing companies, the banks, for which, if you do a research, sir, you will find that the government has already brought in a law in the parliament, but it was defeated. The motion did not approve it because there were certain misunderstanding which was out in the market, and due to political reasons, the government has to defer. So today, if there is a default by housing companies, housing finance companies, or by non-banking financial companies, or by any banks, they cannot be resolved under the insolvency and bankruptcy code because the gamut, the complexity is totally different. Right? The government is also working on the cross-border insolvency. For example, the Jet Airways, which is under insolvency. Jet has so many other group companies in so many other different countries. And the government of our country has to talk to the government of other countries and try to find out that how cross-border insolvency can be resolved. The government is working on it, and we'll soon find that what will be the solution, but it will take much more time. So this was from me. I think I have been able to give you a fair overview in the last 1 hour. And if there are any questions, I'll be definitely take it forward.
There are Sumit, some very interesting questions. Before
Yes.
that, I want a general advice from the students. Especially those who are doing MBA marketing, they do not have much problem. But those who are doing MBA finance, there is always a thing whether they should do a CFA course, they should do more kind of certificate course, etc. Now you tell me honestly, because we have got so many qualifications. But MBA finance, we are not an IIM Ahmedabad or IIM Calcutta. So basically, our students for the MBA finance, what is the path they should take? Do you think they should fast track it to the insolvency thing, or they should do what is the right path for these boys and girls?
I feel that insolvency is an area they must look into because this is a growing area, and they should find out more about GIP, the Graduate Insolvency Program, which is being conducted. And there are placements also which is being offered by the GIP program, and it is a very prestigious program of the government, the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Board of India, which they are personally driving. So if anybody is interested in this finance and the banking default, etc., that is one area. And let me also tell you that the law is also extended to individual default. The personal insolvency law has already been framed. It has not been made effective because of political consideration. And right now, people, when they take loans, so say for example, when a company takes loan, the promoter of that company gives a personal guarantee. So only for personal guarantors, the law has been made effective. Otherwise, the individual insolvency law for individuals, partnership form, and sole proprietorship business, which forms 80 to 90% of the total business loans given by the bankers, will also be following. The law is ready. The government has not given a green signal. And of course, there are political consequences. So that is why we are waiting. So just imagine, there are only 13 lakhs companies in India. And very handful of LLP. Most of the companies which have taken loan may be around 1 lakh, 2 lakh of companies. And out of these 1 or 2 lakh companies have taken loan from banks. But if you look at unorganized business, the partnership, the sole proprietorship, and individual, they form a major chunk of the banking loan. And once the insolvency gets effected for all these entities, just imagine the kind of scope and the opportunity which it will unfold for professionals who are budding. But yes, let me also give you a caveat that this is a very high pressure job. Of course, it will allow you to become and explore all your entrepreneurial skills. You need to take on the challenge. You also need to have some legal mindset also, because it is all about driving the process and the legality of the process involved, which I don't think it is tough. There are advisors, but yes, you should have a basic legal mindset also if you actually want to go ahead with it. And it is not only about driving the process, because once the assets come up for sale, there's a huge deal-making opportunity, the merchant banking opportunity which is available. I mean, so many assets which are earlier, what used to happen? We used to see the newspaper tender notification of the banks. Mr. Banerjee would agree, they would used to come out with surfacing notification. These are the assets up for sale. But now, people like us who are insolvency professionals, they are coming out with a public auction notice. So there are so many assets which has come up for sale through this process. There is the insolvency law. When a company goes into insolvency, the valuation is mandatory. And now there is a concept of registered valuer. So whenever a company goes into insolvency, it is mandatory for an insolvency professional to appoint a registered valuer out of the pool available. And those registered valuer have to pass an examination and get themselves registered with the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Board of India. So there is a opportunity for registered valuer coming in. So they are required to value as per the international valuation norms. Additionally, there is a scope for carrying out the forensic and transaction audit, because as I told you, the law is allowing the honest default to exit by following a process, right? But dishonest people, they will be booked, and that is why the law imposes an obligation on all insolvency professionals that whenever the company goes into insolvency, there must be a forensic audit which is required to be carried out by an expert. So this law has opened up opportunity not only for insolvency professional, but also for registered valuers, transaction audit, insolvency professional, merchant banking opportunity, and n number of opportunities. Right? So this is what the gamut is all about, and it's a huge space. The default is huge, 13 to 20 lakh crore of NPS there in our country, and right now we have only seen 3,000 companies coming in, which has only accounted for 3 to 4 lakh crore of default. So still the scope is too high, and cross-border would definitely open up a lot of opportunity. So this is a good area to look at. This is my suggestion.
Thank you. One more thing, I had a quick question for you. That sometimes the industry cycle may go against you. Like like the steel industry has a cycle. So
Yes.
going against you, and you have Bakshi Steels Limited or JNM Steels Limited, but the industry is going, the cycle is against you. Then you might default, but that could be because of the cycle. So what is the solution for them?
No solution, sir. The cycle. So that is why people have to create buffers, enough buffers for the cycle, because law does not grant any excuse because of cycle. I'll tell you that large steel companies like Monnet Ispat, which I was dealing with, it went into insolvency, and one of the primary reasons was that the coal linkage, which was provided by the government, got cancelled. We all know the political issues. And by that time, bank has already given 700 to 800 crores of loan, and that was already utilized. So balance 1,200 crores was pending to be given by the bank. So as soon as they heard the news that the coal linkage has been withdrawn, the bankers said that no, we'll not give you additional loan. So who is to be blamed? The promoter is to be blamed? No. The government is to be blamed? Yes, partly yes, because they knew that 700 crores have been given by the bank. And since the coal linkage was withdrawn, 1,200 crores bank did not give. So how will the poor promoter repay the 700 crores? Because it is only gone into creation of asset, and that too half assets. So how will he use those assets and run those assets to repay? So that was the money going down the drain. So because of faulty policies also, such things are happening. So cycle, there is no excuse. The promoter has to create enough buffer now wary of the fact that IBC exists, and take less risks, or maybe very, very calculated risks, so that
Right.
whenever such cycle comes, he is able to protect from the internal cash flow. Otherwise, law will be triggered.
So the debt equity ratio is still very low. The debt equity ratio is very low, but either be a zero debt company or be very low debt equity.
No, I think the planning must be there. He should not be taking much risk. The buffer should be there. And promoters are sharp. They are aware of what is coming or what is not coming. So at that point of time, they should prepare themselves.
Acha, this question I'm going to allow not directly with the insolvency. Amrita Nayak, maybe it's more applicable to many of the parents and teachers. This moratorium on these loans during the COVID period. So what is the current situation? Like many of our faculty members may have EMIs, etc. So what is your take on this moratorium business basically?
No, sir, I think the moratorium is basically just deferring you to pay, but the more you defer, the more interest gets built on you. So I mean, it is just deferring your timeline, but while deferring the timeline, it is also putting an additional obligation on all of us. We all have EMIs, so I think it's better not to defer the EMI, better to pay, because whatever you defer gets built into the principal, and additional interest is charged on them, or your time period of repayment also increases. So I don't think
No, but
there's a lot of pressure on this.
But isn't the Supreme Court telling that you cannot charge interest on interest and it has to be a real holiday?
So that matter is still to be resolved. That Supreme Court has also answered, also questioned the intention of the government.
Question of Vaishali Shaw that Vijay Mallya case and Jet Airways, they were actually two very high-flying airlines. So why couldn't they be revived?
So Jet Airways is still under CIRP. Airways is still under CIRP, and I'm told that there is one or two good interest which is being shown. So that hopefully should get revived. But yes, Vijay Mallya case actually took into a different dimension, and at that point of time, the IBC was not brought in force, and I'm sure that Mr. Banerjee will agree, if he has been a banker, that as far as my experience is concerned, the bankers, because of past experiences, they fear to utilize their commercial wisdom because of a lot of questions which they may be asked. Because they may take a commercial decision thinking that it is in the best interest of the company, but at times there may be questions by the enforcement directorate and CBI on their decisions. So that is a fear which has been created in our country, and that is why time and again our finance minister recently, when the COVID started, she was very categorical that the banks should go ahead and fund, and they should not bother about the agencies who would come and questioning their intent. So because of the fear which has been created, banks, in spite of more willing to take commercial call, have not been able to do so, because there was a policy which was definitely not favorable. Even if they wanted to take a call, thinking about the overall good of the defaulter, they were basically detracted from that because of the policies of the government. Vijay Mallya is one such case. Let me tell you, the 8,000 crore default, he was willing to settle at 6,000 crores. And probably at that point of time, because of a lot of political issues, etc., and IBC not in place, none of the bankers said that who will bail the cat, who is going to take a risk of 20% cut. And today we find in IBC, there is, of course, on an average 80% to 85% cut in companies which are getting resolved. So Kingfisher should have been handled in a better way, but I'm sorry, I'll not be able to comment much on that. Jet Airways, we still see a light of it.
Okay, we have spent almost 1.5 hours, and that shows how interesting it was. Time just flew. And I must say that I made notes. I hope the students also have made notes. I'm repeating which my takeaways for the benefit of everyone. I think the huge takeaway for students, that they have a graduate insolvency program and the huge career path of becoming an insolvency professional, maybe a valuer, maybe in merchant banking. I think I am very happy with these two biggest reforms that you mentioned, the IBC 2016 and the GST. And before 2016, there was no recourse practically to creditors, and now bankers are very happy about this, that there's so much recourse going to happen. And after default, the creditors are now going to come forward, and then the insolvency professional to come basically. And the good thing is the promoters are really now afraid that they cannot become willful defaulters because of social stigma and the whole company which they had built for 15-20 years. So I think because of the fast track nature of the IBC, so it's a very fear is, I think, a very important thing in the Indian condition. So now they'll really be careful. And this timeline of 180 days plus 90 days is a very good timeline. And I think it's a great thing that it's a Shanti period, as I said, that no fresh cases filed. So the resolution professional can really try to revive, get fresh investors. And the banquet hall example was very, very good. I think as a banker, Dr. Gaur Banerjee will agree that, there's no point in killing the company, just locking it up. then the whole thing will get waste. So I think this thing of trying to revive is, I think, a very good thing. And this default being filed at 1 crore or 1 lakh, but even in the smallest default, the warnings come. That's a very good thing, because the asymmetry of information between the borrower and the lender. And the waterfall mechanism is very good, but the government themselves are going to put themselves at a much lower pedestal compared to the secured creditors. So that's a very, very good thing. So let us hope that the bankers are able to give the credit delivery comfortably, and lenders also, the promoters also do not take the bankers and the creditors. Right. So Sumit, it was very lucid. It was very nice that, and in spite of a very busy schedule, that you could come out and spend more than 1.5 hours with us, and you did not even know when the 1.5 hours passed. So that is, I think, is a success story of yours.